Hello, and let's talk about researching your topic. This chapter, chapter 6, has a lot of information in it that is useful on a large scale, a meta scale, but at the same time, uh, it covers more in the way of how to research than you would have time for in a typical class like this. So let's take this as kind of for what it's worth as a review of how to do general research for any class, as far as that goes, and in particular for doing a speech. Now, in other videos, I've mentioned that I'm going to tell you exactly what will be covered on the final exam. There's a lot in this chapter. So I'm going to alert you to exactly what will be on the exam as I go through, and then I'll review it at the end. So, researching your topic. All right. Well, slide number one. Another duh slide, as I like to say. All right, you got to prepare to research. So, gathering information, evaluating the information. These are all things that you need to do in preparation, in this case, for giving a speech. An example that I've used before, let's say you're going to give a talk on the Pacific Ocean, big topic. You're going to talk specifically about pollution in the Pacific Ocean. And in particular, you're going to talk about these great trash islands that have formed in the Pacific Ocean. All right, so you need to gather information regarding that. And then you need to do some evaluation. And I do want to bring this up because people forget to do this. How important is that information? What supports your your specific purpose and your thesis statement? So anyway, all right. The most important aspect of giving any speech, it doesn't matter whether it's informative, persuasive, whatever it might be, is making it your own. And that's what they mean by examining personal experiences. If you give a speech about something you really don't have any interest in, you just picked it off the internet somehow, that's really going uh, to show in your presentation. So make sure you identify multiple perspectives, different ideas about your topic. Uh, so so that you have a good balance in your space, in your speech. Who knows about this? What organizations, events that are happening, and okay, that's just kind of a general example, but you want to be as relevant and as timely with this information in your research as you possibly can be. How can I find out more? Well, duh, you Google it, don't you? Of course, if we could get into the library, you could do other things as well. All right. Now, this is kind of interesting. I remember this from, holy cow, it must have been, I think it was American history in 11th grade, 10th grade. There was a big move to study history through primary sources. Now, if you read a book, well, for example, right now, I love Roman history. And I'm currently reading a book called The Death of Caesar. It's about the assassination of Julius Caesar. And it's told in a wonderful, flowing narrative style. It's not your typical dry history book. It's really, I find it very interesting. But it's the author's attempt to tell the story through multiple sources that this author has pulled together to create this book. Is he using the original sources? Well, not in his actual narrative. So, this book, The Death of Caesar, is truly a secondary source on the topic. This is the author's attempt to explain what he's learned through primary sources. And primary sources are written by people who were there. All right. And yes, we actually have sources from people who were there, if not directly at the assassination of Caesar in this particular case, but were alive and gathered information, as these events unfolded. Those are primary sources. Those are the most powerful sources of all. Secondary sources, you need to check and make sure that the information you're getting is truly correct. And once more, as I've said, this is just good stuff to know for any research that you might do for any class. All right. Okay. Here's some examples. A primary source. If you want to cite statistics, for example, in your speech, don't say, "Well, I read somewhere that." Okay, cite the actual primary source. The example here is the Pew Research Center. It's a real thing where they collect data on all kinds of stuff. But if you have read it online in the newspaper, you're saying what's a newspaper? Okay, where the story is citing the Pew Research, well, that's a secondary source. Just as this book I'm reading on the death of Caesar is in fact a secondary source. All right, now here's one of the, and I'm looking at my notes. Why did I print it so small? Okay, here we go. This will be on the final exam. This is a question on the final exam. Make sure you know what a meta research is. What is what can a meta research engine do for you? And of course, this is where you go to Google, for example, and you type in Sherlock Holmes, Julius Caesar, whatever. You're going to get 5 bazillion hits. All right. So that's where you start. So a meta research engine gives you general information on your topic. Remember that word, general. And again, this is truly worth knowing. It's a starting point. Meta research is your starting point. It tells you where you can go to look for information. Most of us, myself included, will quite frequently type in, okay, I'm going to stick with Julius Caesar. Type in Julius Caesar. And one of the first listings that will come up out of the literally 1.5 million hits that might occur is Wikipedia. Well, Wikipedia is okay as a starting point. I would lump Wikipedia into the meta research engine. Gives you general information. Your professors will gag on their lunch if you say, "I found it on Wikipedia." No, it's only a starting point. So make sure that you understand that, and that you don't cite meta engine results as primary sources. They aren't. All right, specialized meta research engines, web directories, all of these can be used to get you started on your topic, whatever it might be. Okay, and then of course the library. I love libraries. Oh God, I'm going to slip into the old guy thing here. When I was a kid, I was born in Kentucky, but when I was about 7 years old or something, my family moved to this little bitty town called St. Joseph, Michigan, of about 8,000 people. And we had one of the old Carnegie libraries on the corner of State Street and Market. And I can remember my mother taking my sister and me there, and we stood at the bottom of those 9 steps leading up into the library. And God love her, my mother said, "Ray, Pam, you can learn anything in this building." And even as a 7-year-old, I took that to heart. I love libraries. But of course, right now, libraries are off limits to most of us. But it's a great place to go and work. Books, journals, magazines, newspapers. Once again, when I first started teaching communications at my first university, We spent several days in the university library looking at research uh, materials and how to find them. It's actually much easier now than it ever was in the past. But don't just say, I'll just look it up online. When things let up and we can get back to the libraries, go to the library. All right. Okay, maximizing your search. Again, I'm just going to stick with online because I know that's what everyone's doing. Keywords. Don't type in some long. Well, let me go back to Julius Caesar. If I just type in Julius Caesar, I'm going to get all kinds of stuff about Julius Caesar. If I type in assassination of Julius Caesar, of course, I'm beginning to narrow my search. I'm adding keywords uh, to that search to help narrow it down. I have a feeling I'm not telling most of you anything that you haven't already done in the past. Here's another example. If you just type in the words free speech, you're going to get all kinds of stuff. But if you're doing a paper about the First Amendment, then obviously you need to type in something more specific. First Amendment would be another choice. Freedom of speech, First Amendment, Bill of Rights. All of these will help narrow your search. What else do I have up here? Instead of trying to go back and forth to my notes, I'm going to go back to my notes at the end of the PowerPoint and just go through it with you. All right, again, narrowing your search. I don't think I need to say too much more about this. Here's some example. Keywords, child, parent. Okay, give it a date after 1990, or you're looking specifically for documents. Anything you can do to narrow your search will certainly help provide better information. All right, images, videos. Again, all of this. Copyright information. That's kind of interesting. Is the information that you're getting copyrighted? Where did it come from? Make sure you credit the author and cite your sources. Ooh, I talked about that in the informative speech, how important that is. Why? Why is it important? It's important because even if you're an expert, and for example, because of my rather odd experience in graduate school, I ended up with advanced degrees, not only in communications, but in science. And so I've taught science too. So I know a lot about astronomy. But when I give a presentation about astronomy, I don't just talk about my experiences. I always cite information from other credible sources. And there's the key word. When you cite these sources, you add credibility to your own speech. And that's really important because if you're giving an informative speech and specifically a persuasive speech, you need people to trust the information that you're giving them. And when you cite multiple sources, I found it here, I found it there, this noted person has also said, anything like that will add tremendous credibility to your presentation. Now, here's something I don't think happens too often in these speech classes because, again, it's difficult to find the time in a short one semester class to do all of this. But doing interviews is a great way to get really good primary sources. But anyway, I just want to point something out here on this slide. Notice this. Now, when I talk about media in your presentations, normally when we're in the classroom, I have everyone do PowerPoint, Google Slides, whatever. And I'm not real concerned where the images come from because we're only doing this in class as an exercise. But if you ever find yourself giving a presentation to a large group of people, you need to even cite where you're getting the images from. Okay, that's I'll come back to that in the other lecture. All right, so you might want to give a presentation about the pandemic, and you happen to know a doctor. Oh, wouldn't it be nice to actually interview the doctor? And of course, you can do that remotely uh, and get some quotes directly from the doctor. If you can talk to her and get those quotes, it makes, again, for a more powerful presentation. All right. So, just some interview guidelines. The authors of this book like this. Uh, and this will be on the quiz or the test, by the way. The most important thing you can do to get started in an interview is make the person you're asking questions of comfortable. That's what we mean by rapport. Establishing rapport with the person you're interviewing. Uh, you start out with some general broad questions, and then you become more specific with your questions. And of course, you always want to make the person who took their time uh, to talk to you comfortable, and also thanking them for the time and effort. And again, assuring them that they will receive credit for any quotes that you might use in your presentation. All right. Conducting the interview. I'm not gonna spend much time on this. Make sure you're in a place that's quiet and comfortable. If you're going to record the interview, ask permission to do it. Don't just turn on your phone and hit record. Always, always ask permission. It says ask one question at a time. Well, that's pretty obvious. Have your questions written out, even if it's just handwritten, so that you get them in order. And it says here, monitor verbal and nonverbal cues. Obviously, if you ask a question and the person feels uncomfortable, for example, or if they get really excited and animated, that tells you something about the way they're answering the question, doesn't it? More about interviews. All right, one good thing about an interview, one important part, is it really does grab your audience. You could even use it as an opening grabber. In preparation for this speech on the death of Julius Caesar, I got in my time machine and went back and interviewed that great Roman orator Cicero. Well, okay, you might not believe that, but yes, you could use uh, a quote from the interview as your grabber to open the speech. According to Dr. So and so, blah, blah, blah. That's a great way to pull your audience into what uh, you're talking about. All right, and again, make sure you give credentials, the name of the person. Don't leave that out, because if you do, you're breaking rule number 2, which is, am I hearing it? I think so. Never assume anything. In other words, don't assume your audience is going to know who this person is, no matter how famous they might be. All right, and then provide closure and leaves audience with, yeah, you can use it at the end of your speech as well. All right, we'll leave interviews behind. Research materials, okay. Relevance, purpose, validity, all of these are important materials that you might find for your speech. All right, and then there's a chart in the book, and of course I'm here squinting. How relevant is the source? What's the author's purpose? Why did the author include that information in there? This one, number 3, is actually quite important. How current is the information? If you go online and you find information from 1986 on pandemics, okay, well, there were pandemics prior to the one that we're dealing with now, but the point is uh, that interview or that research or reference material from 1986 is not going to be current. So use the most current information you can. Who wrote this? Who published it? What evidence has the author provided? Has anything been left out? Well, that means you're doing an awful lot of research if you can figure that out. Is the author, and this one's kind of important, is there a bias on the part of the author to begin with? Oh, you bet there will be. Absolutely. You need to be aware of those biases. And what inferences or conclusions has the author drawn? In other words, you know, what did you get from this particular material? Those are just things to think about. Making sure you're using current and up-to-date information is really, really important. Now then, you've got all this stuff, all this information. You found all this information online. Be careful not to plagiarize. All right, it's perfectly fine to quote from a source. Just make sure you cite the source properly. According to Barron's financial report in 2016, the total value of all the gold in the world is close to $10 trillion. Okay. Now, if I just said all the gold in the world, if you add up its value, is worth $10 trillion, I hope most people would sit in their chairs and think, how the heck does he know that? Okay. And where did he get that from? Well, it's not as blatant plagiarism as I've seen, but it's still plagiarism. All right. I had a speech once from a student who stood up in front of the class. She essentially read from a script instead of using an outline, which was a no-no to start with. But I could just tell by the way it was written, the words that were being used, that this was just copy and pasted from something. It took me a few minutes when I went back to my office and sat down with this person's outline to find exactly where she'd plagiarized it from, word for word. Don't want to do that. If you use somebody else's words, tell us who those words belong to. All right. Academic integrity. Yeah, don't claim that this is yours if it's someone else's. All right. All right. Other things that you can do, take accurate notes. You know, I've noticed more and more, and this is another old guy thing. You know, I started, God, I was thinking about this yesterday. The very first university class I ever taught was in 1979. Oh, God. But I have noticed over the decades that fewer and fewer students take physical notes in class. In other words, write in a notebook. All right. But when you're doing research, make sure, however you take those notes, that you take accurate notes. What does paraphrasing mean? Okay, let's say you find a long passage about freedom of speech, and you can't deal with that whole long passage, so you basically reduce it to one sentence. That's paraphrasing. It still needs to be cited. Just because you paraphrased it doesn't mean it's now yours. It's still plagiarism if you don't cite it. Okay, this is all stuff that you would do on your outline. Okay, boldface marks for quotations, different color fonts for quotations, highlighting for quotes. These are all techniques that you can use to make your speech a little bit easier. All right, put the source's information in your own words. That's paraphrasing. And there's an example of this that I've used over and over again. Remember what Winston Churchill said about the opening of your speech? Make sure you tell them what you're going to tell them about. He didn't say it exactly that way. That's a paraphrase of what he said. But I still cite Winston Churchill as the source. The actual quotation that I could use for Winston Churchill is relatively long. It was in a book he had written about giving speeches, okay? But that's the essence of it. That's paraphrased, but I still cite it. Yeah, okay, that's paraphrasing. All right, oral citations. All right, in August 2015, TED Fellow related talk, artist Christine Sun Kim, who was born deaf, said this about American Sign Language. That's a long citation, but it's important. Again, if you're going to use a quote, make sure you tell us what the source is and be accurate in it. Now, I have been very specific in saying that I don't require MLA formatted references on your outlines. But here's an example of a complete reference, biographical reference, bibliographic reference that you might use. And again, you might find that you need to do this even for other classes. By the way, it says retrieved from, and it's got the full website address. But up here it says what it is. Okay, as I've said with the informative and the persuasive speech, you can't just provide a web address. It's meaningless. You've got to also tell us what it is, all right, or where it came from. Okay, research guidelines. Another duh slide. Start early. Oh, really? I've often said, it's a mantra now, I've said it so many times, procrastination is the nail in the coffin of public speaking. If you wait until the last minute, you're going to be miserable. Make sure you have time for research, your questions, and record your results accurately. All right, again, taking notes on each source, uh, uh, knowing when to move on. In other words, don't gather so much information for, in this case, a 7-minute speech that you overwhelm yourself. So those are all important. Uh, okay, I've reached the last slide. But knowing when to go back, knowing when to quit. Someone once said, and I don't know the source of this one, but someone once said, one of the features of a great artist is knowing when to quit. All right. Anyway, so let me look at my notes here, and this is specifically for the final exam. I will remind you elsewhere, but if you're going to take notes, now would be a good time to do it. All right. One of the questions on the final exam from Chapter 6, as I've already told you, one of them is about uh, uh, meta research. Know what meta research engines are. Remember, meta research gives you general information. After that, you need to start narrowing your search criteria down to specifics. So that will be on the exam. Make sure you understand what plagiarism is. And in the slide presentation, I just mentioned it a bit, but in Chapter 6, they talk about plagiarism uh, quite clearly. So make sure you read the little section about plagiarism. What else do I have? Chapter 6 uses a word uh, about information that you might do research on, that the information has currency, like money, but not money, currency. And what they mean by that is that the information is up to date. It's current. That's currency, not like money currency, but it's current information. That's the example I gave. There have been pandemics going on for centuries, but if you only look at a source for your speech on pandemics and it was posted in 1986, well, it doesn't have currency, does it? Okay, so it means up to date. So that's a word you need to be familiar with. Currency in terms of research. What else do I have? Um, oh, and this has happened to me on any number of occasions. If you quote someone that you've talked to or that you've listened to or from a video that you watched online, that's called an oral citation. Does that make sense? An oral citation. In other words, you didn't read it anywhere, you heard someone say it. You still need to give a citation for who said that. But if it's information that was provided through some source in class, a lecture, online video, anything like that, where it's spoken, well, that's an oral citation. What else do we have here? Okay, they talk about doing the interviews. The primary task in opening an interview is to develop that rapport with whomever you're interviewing to make them comfortable. Okay, and then finally, make sure you look at the beginning of the chapter where they talk about the important things you can do to get ready to do research. In this case, I'm going to say it's all about you. It's all about your personal experience. Make sure you examine that personal experience. Make sure that what you're going to be doing is relevant to you first, and then it will be relevant to those who are listening to you as well. I'll remind you of these things later, but there you go. I promised you at the end of this presentation that I would go over those questions. There they are. And of course, you can always back this video up and listen to me say it all over again if you want, and take notes. All right. So there you go. Researching your topic, and we'll be moving on to media in presentations in the next video.